Arizona Territory, 1882. The sun was a cruel god above the high desert, and by the time she fell to her knees beside the splintered frame of the old barn, Harper Ellison could hardly breathe. Her bonnet had been lost miles back, her boots cracked and bleeding at the ankles, her dress ripped at the seams. The barn stood half-eaten by time, the roof sagging, its walls leaning like old men too tired to stand straight. But to Harper, it looked like salvation. She collapsed beside it, fingers digging into the hot sand, her chest heaving. Her lips moved, whispering names she barely had the strength to say anymore. Tobias, Thea. She did not hear the hoofbeats, not at first, but the ground trembled, a low pulse. Then the rider came into view, tall in the saddle, lean and sharp-eyed. He slowed his horse, eyes catching the shape of her body by the barn. In a blink he was off, boots crunching as he ran to her. "Miss," he said, kneeling. "Hey, stay with me, can you hear me?" She tried to lift her head. The sun made a halo behind him. Not an angel, no, he was dusty and rough, with a week's worth of beard and a rifle slung across his back, but his voice was soft, steady. "Water," she rasped. He pulled his canteen free, held it to her lips. She drank in greedy gasps, coughing once before slumping forward. He caught her before she hit the dirt. "I got you," he said, wrapping an arm behind her shoulders. "You are safe now." Her weight was nothing in his arms. He carried her to the shade of the barn, laying her down on his blanket. "My name's Fletcher Grant," he said. "We will rest here a moment, then I will get you out of this heat." She blinked at him, her lips cracked and eyes wild. "They took them," she whispered. "My children, please." Fletcher's jaw clenched. He looked down at her, this woman who had come crawling through the desert like a ghost. "Tell me what happened." She fought to stay conscious. "My wagon broke down north of here. We were headed to Bisbee. A man came by, said he would help. Instead, he took my supplies, took my son and daughter." "Tobias is 8, Thea is 5, her voice cracked. "He left me there, said I was no use to him." Fletcher stood, rage burning in his chest. "Did you see where he went?" "South," she whispered. "Toward the mountains." He crouched beside her again, his voice low. "I will get them back." "You do not even know me," Harper said, her hand trembling as she reached for his sleeve. He caught her fingers, held them tight. "You are a mother, that is enough." Fletcher worked fast. He made a small shelter from the barn's broken boards, left her with water, his blanket, and a revolver. "If anything comes near, you shoot. I will be back before sundown." She tried to speak, but he was already gone, riding hard into the south. Fletcher had once been a cavalry scout, and though he had not worn the uniform in 5 years, the instincts were still sharp. He found the wagon trail by mid-afternoon, the tracks pointing toward the Whetstone Mountains. He spotted the fire first. Then the man, burly, greasy, armed. He was laughing near the fire, children's voices nearby. Fletcher crept low through the brush, heart pounding when he saw them, 2 small figures huddled near a rock, tied at the wrists. Tobias held his sister close, his face bruised, clothes torn, but alive. Fletcher circled behind the camp. When the man turned to piss in the brush, Fletcher stepped out behind him. "Drop it," he said, rifle aimed. The man froze, then made the mistake of trying to reach for his gun. 1 shot. The man fell backward, no time to scream. Fletcher moved fast, cut the children loose. "Are you Tobias?" he asked. "And Thea?" The boy nodded. "Your mama is safe, she sent me." Tears filled Thea's eyes. "Mama's alive, she is waiting for you, come on." He carried Thea, Tobias riding in front of him on the saddle. The sun was just touching the horizon when they neared the barn again. Harper was still there, lying in the shadow. She sat up when she saw them, her breath catching. "Mama," Tobias shouted. She screamed their names, running barefoot through the sand. Fletcher lifted Thea down and Harper fell to her knees, gathering both children close, her arms trembling. She wept openly, holding them so tight Fletcher thought she might never let go. "You came back," she said to him, voice shaking. "I said I would." She rose slowly, her children clinging to her skirts, and stepped toward him. Her face was streaked with tears and dust, but her eyes were clear now, steady. "Why did you help me?" she asked. Fletcher took a slow breath. "Because I was lost before I saw you." Now I am not. She looked up at him. The wind lifted strands of her hair, and in that moment something passed between them, quiet, sure. You found me, she whispered. He nodded. And I am not letting you go. She reached out, touched his chest, her hand over his heart. Then stay. Please? He wrapped his arms around her, and she leaned into him with a sigh that sounded like relief. Tobias and Thea stood nearby, watching the man who had brought them home. Thea smiled. Harper whispered, "You saved us." Fletcher held her close, the children at their sides, and for the first time in years he knew why he was still in this world. The morning after, a hush lay over the desert, broken only by the soft rustle of wind through creosote and the distant chirr of cicadas. Fletcher had risen before the children stirred, tacking his horse and checking the rifle slung across his saddle. Harper sat nearby, her back against the barn wall, arms wrapped around her knees. Thea slept against her hip, Tobias curled beside her like a pup who'd spent too long cold. He didn't speak, not right away. The quiet between them held a weight that didn't need filling. "You have plans?" she asked finally, voice low and scratchy from sleep. He ran a hand over the back of his neck. "South of Tombstone, there's a ranch I was headed for, fencing job. Pays steady." She reached for her satchel, the one he'd salvaged yesterday from the brush near the fire. Inside was a torn piece of map, a single bootlace, and a small tin brooch shaped like a lark. She held the pin in her palm a moment, then tucked it away again. "I was promised 40 acres outside Bisbee. The man who sold it to me had a silver tongue and forged papers." Fletcher's jaw tightened. "You figure to still go?" "Not anymore." She looked out across the flat earth, the sun rising pale and wide. "I ain't got a cent to my name. Not even a working wheel beneath me, but I've still got them." She glanced down at the sleeping children. "So I suppose I'll figure something." He nodded, then crouched beside her, brushing dirt from his boot. "I know a woman out near Gleason, widow named May. Keeps a clean house, takes in mending and boarders when she can. If you're looking for a place to start again, she'd be fair to you." Harper studied him. "You think she'd taken a stranger with 2 mouths more?" "She took me in once," he said, standing again. "Back when I didn't even have a name worth saying." Thea stirred, blinking up at her mother. Tobias sat up, rubbing grit from his eyes. "Are we riding again?" he asked. Fletcher glanced toward the sky. "If we want to reach Gleason before the midday heat, we ought to." They packed quickly, Harper tearing the skirt from her dress into strips to pad Thea's small feet. Fletcher lifted Tobias onto the saddle, then helped Harper up behind him, Thea cradled in her arms. He walked beside the horse, hand on the reins, boots crunching through the hardpan. It was past noon when the first cottonwoods came into view, their green leaves a miracle against the dun-colored plain. A narrow creek snaked through the rocks, shallow but clean. Fletcher halted the horse, filling a tin cup and handing it to Harper. She drank slowly, then passed it to her son. "You always know where to find water?" "No," Fletcher said, kneeling to fill the canteen. "But I remember places that saved me once." She watched him as he worked, eyes lingering on the way his sleeves were rolled, the sun darkening the skin along his forearms. "You always this steady?" He didn't answer for a long beat. "Then, not until I saw you crawling through the dirt with nothing but a will to live." She looked down at her lap, fingers curling around the edge of the saddle. "I ain't proud of how I looked." "I am," he said. "I never seen a person look more like they belonged on this earth." They reached Widow May's just as the light began to soften. The house sat nestled behind a stand of mesquite, whitewashed and plain, with a porch slanted just enough to show its years. May opened the door with a wary hand on her hip, but her eyes warmed when she saw Fletcher. "You bringing me another stray?" she asked, voice dry as salt. "Bringing you a family that's got more grit than gold." May took one look at Harper's bruised cheek and Thea's torn hem, then opened the door wide. "Well, come in then. I've got beans on and room enough for the lot." Inside, the house smelled of sage and lye soap. Tobias found a stool and sat without needing to be told. Thea clung to Harper's skirts as May poured water from a jug into a chipped basin. "You'll want to wash before supper. Got a change of dress you can take in." It'll be loose but better than rags. Harper held her eyes, something raw flickering in her voice. Thank you, I'll earn the room, I can mend or cook or may wave a hand. You'll do what you can. That's all any of us manage. Later, after the children had fallen asleep beneath quilts that smelled faintly of lavender, Fletcher stood on the porch, arms folded. Harper stepped out beside him, her borrowed dress hanging loose at the shoulders. You're not staying, she said. He looked at the stars, not her. I've got work waiting, silence stretched between them. But you didn't ride off this morning, she said. You stayed. I did. She reached for the porch post, fingers brushing the wood. They've never known a man who didn't take more than he gave. He turned to her then, the lines at his eyes deepening. Then maybe it's time they did. She stepped closer, her breath slow. I don't have much left in me to give, but if I did, I'd want to give it to someone who saw more in me than what he found on the ground. He touched her hand gently, as though afraid to startle her. You already have. She nodded once, then leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. He didn't move away. The wind rustled dry leaves overhead, and the house behind them creaked softly as it settled. Fletcher had known 100 roads, but none he'd ever wanted to walk twice. This one he intended to stay on. By the third morning in Gleason, the dust had settled into the creases of Harper's borrowed dress, and the ache in her limbs had dulled to something manageable. She stood behind Widow May's shed, sleeves rolled to the elbows, sorting through a basket of shirts in need of mending. The air smelled of mesquite smoke and sun-warmed wool. Tobias was helping May in the henhouse, while Thea sat on the porch shelling peas into a tin bowl, humming with a rhythm all her own. Fletcher approached from behind the barn, his boots quiet in the sand. He carried a small stack of lumber on one shoulder, the nails clinking in his other hand. I passed the livery early, he said, setting the boards down carefully. Old man there said the water trough keeps going dry. I told him I'd see to the pump if he'd lend me a mule for the next week. Harper didn't look up right away. She was threading a needle through a torn cuff, her hands moving with the quiet steadiness of someone used to doing 3 things at once. You planning to stay a week, then? He leaned against the post beside her. It's easier to keep going when you've got somewhere you're going to. She glanced at him beneath her lashes. You think that place is here? I think there's something here that makes the days feel worth the work. She tied off the stitch, biting the thread. May said there's a teacher's position open in Tombstone. Schoolhouse lost their last one to pneumonia before Christmas. I could apply if I had a skirt that wasn't patched 12 ways. You've been teaching them already, he said, nodding toward the porch. Thea counted to 20 yesterday without blinking. Tobias asked me if the stars always rise the same way. Harper folded the shirt, set it on the pile. I want them to know the world's bigger than what they've seen. Bigger than the man who tried to take them. Fletcher didn't answer right away. He picked up a fallen nail, turned it between his fingers. I ain't never thought about children before, didn't think I belonged around 'em, but yours. They look at me like I matter, because you do. He looked at her then, and something passed between them that didn't need naming. That night they sat beneath the sky behind May's house, the stars stretching wide above the hills. The children had fallen asleep early, worn out from a day spent chasing chickens and drawing shapes in the dust with a stick Fletcher had whittled for them. Harper poured 2 cups of chicory coffee, passing one to him without a word. He sipped it, made a face. Still bitter. That's because May boils it like it's punishment. She likes you. I peel her potatoes without complaining. That earns a person something. Fletcher set his cup down. You ever think about what you'll do if Tombstone doesn't take you? Harper leaned back against the porch rail, her feet bare. Then I'll do something else. Maybe take in sewing, maybe help May full-time. He watched her quietly. If I took that fencing job south of here, there'd be room on the land, enough to build something. A small place, it wouldn't be much. She turned her head, studying him. Why are you telling me that? Because I don't want to ride away again. Not from this. Not from you? Harper was silent for a long time. The only sound was the wind brushing through the dry grass and the faint creak of the porch boards beneath them. Finally, she said, "I've been someone's burden before. I won't be that again. If I stay because I've got something to give." He reached for her hand, his fingers rough and warm against hers. "You already gave me what I didn't know I needed," her voice caught. "What's that?" "Purpose." She looked down at their joined hands, then back at his face. "And what if I said I wanted you to stay?" "I'd say I already decided to." She leaned forward and pressed her forehead gently against his. He didn't move, didn't speak, just let the closeness settle like a promise. The night held them in that stillness, and for once neither of them reached for the past. They were already building something new. A week later, the dry wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain from the east, though the sky stayed blue. Harper stood at the edge of May's garden, waist deep in sage and broomweed, with a borrowed shovel in her hands. The ground was hard, but she worked steadily, planting a row of onions May had bartered off a passing peddler. Dirt clung beneath her nails. Her back ached. But the rhythm of it, the press of the blade, the weight of the earth quieted something inside her that had been loud too long. Fletcher came up the hill from the livery, leading the mule he'd borrowed, its pack loaded with cedar posts and coils of wire. Sweat darkened the back of his collar and dust clung to his jaw. He tied the reins to the fence, then crossed to her, stepping over a fallen rail she hadn't yet cleared. "You're digging too close to the mesquite," he said, nodding toward the row. "Roots'll choke it out." She leaned on the shovel. "Thought I had it measured right." "You were close," he said. "Here," he knelt, pressing his palm into the soil. "You want to start from this edge, give it 3 feet." She crouched beside him, brushing hair from her face with the back of her wrist. "How do you know so much about planting?" "My mother kept a garden in Missouri. Nothing fancy, but she always said if your hands knew the dirt, your heart stayed clean." Harper was quiet a moment, then said, "Did she live long enough to see you grown?" He shook his head once. "Passed before I turned 17. After that, I drifted, didn't much care where I landed." She traced a pattern in the dust with the tip of the shovel. "I didn't know my father. My mother worked in a boarding house in Kansas City. She died the winter Thea was born." He glanced at her. "You raised them alone that long?" "I raised them with what little I had. Some years were better than others." He didn't answer right away, just leaned back on his heels and looked out over the brush. "I've been offered a permanent place on the McAllister spread. 20 head to tend and a bunkhouse of my own." Her throat tightened. "That's a good job." "It is. You said it was south of here. Just past the ridge, close enough I'd be back most evenings." Her fingers curled tighter around the handle. "I don't want to keep you from it. You wouldn't be." She looked at him then, the sun hitting her eyes just enough to make them glint like flint stone. "Thea's been sleeping through the night." "Tobias asked if we could stay here longer than we planned." "What did you tell him?" "I told him we'd stay as long as we needed to." Fletcher stood, brushing his palms on his trousers. "Then maybe it's time we start thinking about what we need instead of what we're running from." She rose slowly. "You mean together?" "I do." A horse called from the paddock, low and restless. The sky had gone pale at the horizon, the light shifting softer. Harper pressed a hand to her lower back, then glanced toward the house. "I've never shared a roof with a man." "Not as a choice." "I've never built a home with anyone," he said, "but I'd like to with you." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked to the fence line, trailing her fingers along the rail Fletcher had mended last week. The field stretched open beyond it, nothing fancy, just scrub and rock. A few patches of stubborn grass, but it was more than she'd ever had to call her own. Thea's giggle rang from the porch. Tobias was chasing her in a circle, his bare feet kicking up dust. May sat nearby, mending a torn apron, her head bent but her eyes taking in everything. Harper turned back to Fletcher. "We'd need a stove that burns clean, and space enough for the children to sleep separate from the firewood. I can build that, and I want to keep teaching. Even if it's just the 2 of them." "I'd expect you to." She stepped toward him. "Then I suppose we've got our answer." He reached for her hand, and this time she let him take it fully, no hesitation, no trembling, just the feel of calloused skin and steady warmth. "You sure?" he asked. "I am." He drew her close, not for show, not for comfort, just because it felt right. She rested her cheek against his chest, listening to the slow, even beat beneath. They didn't speak again for a long while. They didn't need to. Somewhere behind them, the wind shifted again, and this time the rain smell was stronger, more certain. It would come by morning, washing the dust from the fields, softening the ground beneath their feet. When it did, they'd be ready. The August rains came hard and sudden just after dusk, catching them all still out at the edge of the property line where Fletcher had been stringing the last of the fencing wire. Thea squealed at the first drop, clutching Harper's hand as they hurried beneath the lean-to Fletcher had nailed up beside the barn. Tobias came tearing through the brush, arms out wide like wings, soaked to the waist and laughing as he ducked under the roof beside them. Fletcher arrived a minute later, boots heavy with mud, hat dripping. He shook the rain from his shoulders and crouched beside Tobias, checking the boy's scraped palm from where he'd tripped. Harper knelt beside them, brushing damp hair from Tobias's forehead. "He's fine," Fletcher said, softly enough for only her to hear. "Just skin." She nodded, her breath still fast from the run. "I'd forgotten what it felt like to be caught in a storm and not be afraid." He didn't answer but reached over and gently wiped a smear of dirt from her cheek with the edge of his sleeve. She allowed his hand to linger. Inside the house later that evening, she showed him the floor plans she'd drawn with charcoal on old feed sacks. Simple, but solid. One large room with a stone hearth, 2 small sleeping quarters, and a porch wide enough for shade. He studied them by lamplight, Tobias leaning against his side. Thea, already curled up on the cot, May had lent them. "You draw these yourself?" he asked, tracing the lines with a calloused finger. "I did." "I watched my mother sketch them once she used to dream about owning a place with apple trees and a painted fence. Never came close, but I remember how her hands moved." He looked at her across the lamplight. "You want trees?" she shrugged. "I'd settle for anything that roots. I'll start digging post holes for the corner beams tomorrow. We'll put it just past the rise where the ground holds firm." She smiled quietly and set the charcoal aside. By late September, the house had walls. Fletcher laid the floorboards himself, planed smooth from pine hauled in by mule cart. Harper chinked the cracks between the planks with clay and straw. May offered an old iron stove that had sat dormant in her shed for years, and Fletcher spent 2 days fitting it into the hearth. On the third night, Harper caught him standing in the doorway, staring at the empty space where the roof would soon go. She stepped beside him, handing him a tin mug filled with warm water and honey. "You're quiet," she said. "I'm thinking about what a strange thing it is," he said, "to build something that's meant to last." She leaned against the frame, shoulder to his. "You think it will? I wouldn't be here otherwise." She reached for his hand, threading her fingers between his. "I've never said it proper," she murmured, "but I love you. I didn't know I could, not after everything, but I do." He turned to her, his eyes steady. "It's you, Harper. It's always been you, from the moment I saw you fight to live." He kissed her then, slow and certain, there beneath the open sky and half-built rafters. There was no rush in it, no fear. Just the quiet knowing of 2 people who had come through fire and found each other on the other side. They were married by a traveling circuit preacher in mid-October, under a mesquite strung with a few faded ribbons May had kept in a box since her own wedding long ago. Tobias wore a shirt 2 sizes too big, and Thea held a bouquet of dried wildflowers Harper had gathered the week before. The service was short, honest, no guests beyond May and the children, and no music save the wind. After, Fletcher lifted Harper's veil, just a borrowed scrap of lace, and said, "You sure?" Her laugh was soft. "I am." They moved into the house before the first frost. Thea took the smaller room, lacing her window with scraps of embroidered fabric Harper had mended by hand. Tobias helped Fletcher build a wooden bin for the kindling, his handwriting carved into the lid. Harper hung a line of herbs above the stove: sage, mint, and a bundle of lavender tied with twine. The winter came in slower than usual that year, the skies holding back their worst. In the evenings, Fletcher read aloud from the only book May had gifted them, a worn copy of Aesop's Fables. Harper stitched while he read, and the children leaned against her skirts, their eyes heavy and warm. One night, as the fire snapped low, Fletcher looked up from the page. "Do you ever wonder what it might have been like if we hadn't crossed paths?" "No," Harper said, setting her needle aside. "Because we did. That's all that matters." He kissed her hand, and she rested her head on his shoulder, the children already dozing. They had no riches, no grand spread of land, but they had each other. A home built from sweat and kindness, and a future shaped by steady hands. Come spring, Harper planted vegetables in the earth she once feared would swallow her. Fletcher taught Tobias how to mark the fence lines, and Thea learned to sew stitches as even as her mother's. And on warm evenings, when the wind blew soft across the porch, Harper would sit with her feet tucked beneath her, watching the land stretch wide in every direction. She never dreamed again of running because she was home, and she was loved.